Hi everyone, Period Help Australia here, and today I'm doing a video on the top and back of cloth pads as part 3 of my How to Make Cloth Pads series. Now that I think about it, I probably should have done this one before my cores video because you actually need the top of the pad to be able to make the core, but that's okay. So to do this, you're going to need a pattern that you've already made. This pattern here is one that I adapted from the pattern I made in the How to Make a Cloth Pad pattern video. So if you haven't already got your own pattern, or if you haven't made one off my video, you can go and watch that video here. Now, I'm going to link it on the screen somewhere. Go ahead and click on that. Okay, now I've got that covered. I'm hoping that you've already got a pattern, just like this one, and I'm going to show you what fabrics you can use for the top of your pad, what fabrics you can use for the back, and how to cut them out. Alright, so the fabric that I most commonly use for the top of pads is cotton, specifically quilter's cotton. This is, so cotton itself is just a fibre, made from the cotton plant. But if you went into a fabric store and asked for plain cotton fabrics, they would generally lead you to these. These are quilter's cottons. They're a flat woven cotton, and they're very, very readily available. They come in all sorts of ranges of prices, and you'll need to, sort of investigate to make sure you're getting a good deal. You can get them anywhere from, $5 to $25 per metre. It just depends on where you're shopping and what brands you're getting. So, these are just a few different cottons I've got here. I've got my Christmas penguins, books, stars, but the fabric that I'm going to be using today is a Doctor Who print. This one is so cool. I made myself a skirt out of it, and I'm using the offcuts up in making pads. So I'm using cotton today, but there's plenty of other fabrics you could use. Alright, another fabric that you could easily use is flannel. These three are all flannel. I've got my frogs, my Marvel superheroes print, and just this sort of checked one. Flannel is also readily available in fabric stores, and you can upcycle old bed sheets and pajamas to get yourself flannel fabric as well. So these two are the fabrics that I most commonly use for the tops of my pads, but there's plenty of others you can use. You could use a non-water resistant microfleece, you can use cotton jersey, you can use a athletic wicking jersey, you can use so many pads. I'm going to link a video by Precious Stars pads here so that you can go and watch that. She lists a few more than I have. So today's pad is going to be cotton. Flannel is also made from the same fibre. Flannel's made from cotton, but it's not the same as flat cotton. What happens to flannel is that they weave the cotton and then they brush it with a specific type of comb to give it this fluffy texture. And some people prefer flannel because it's nice and soft. Other people don't like it because it can be a bit warmer. And in Australia, that can be a bit of an issue. So it's just a matter of finding which one works for you. I'd also recommend when you're starting out, don't use a stretch fabric like, say, cotton jersey, because stretch fabrics are far harder to sew with. Cotton and flannel are non-stretch fabrics. Cotton jersey, any jerseys, are going to be stretchy because they're knitted rather than woven. It's just in the way that the fabric's made. So now it comes to the back of the pads. And on the back of a pad, you're going to want a water-resistant or waterproof fabric, unless you have one hidden in the core. So the most common fabric to put on the back of pads is fleece. There's a lot of different types of fleece. The most common that you would find in a fabric store in Australia is advertised as polar fleece. Now be careful with this, because depending on where you're shopping and how expensive the fleece is, it will vastly differ in quality. I found that the ones at Lincraft are really, really expensive, but you're not paying for quality when you get that. They were, I don't remember how much they were a metre, but it was far more than the $12 a metre I pay at my local fabric store. And the ones that I get from my local store are really excellent quality, and the ones at Lincraft, I could tell that they were just going to let the water, let any flow straight through them. They weren't going to resist the water. So, yeah, go for a good quality fleece. They will be advertised all as polar fleece generally, but have a feel, hold it up to the light. If it lets a lot of light through, if you can see straight through it, then it's not going to do you much good. You want a thick, dense fleece, rather like this one. As you can see, You can't really see much light through it. It's dense and heavy, and therefore is far less likely to leak. The other good thing about fleece is that it's also fluffy, which means that it will grip your underwear and stop your pad from sliding around. However, fleece is not 100% waterproof, it's only water resistant, and that's the issue. And that's why some people choose to use a completely waterproof fabric, such as PUL. This is a piece of PUL. It is a slightly stretchy fabric because it's made out of a jersey, and it is shiny on one side and matte on the other. Now this fabric, it's a polyester knit, but it has been coated in, I'm not entirely sure what the substance is, but it's been laminated, that's the process that it's called, and that means that no water can get through there, no fluid can leak through the shiny side unless you puncture it. PUL is great for completely waterproofing a pad, and you can either use it as the very back layer of a pad, or you can use it inside a pad just behind the core and then have a more grippy fabric on the outside. That's the downside to PUL. It can slip on your underwear a bit and means that the pad may shift around and make it uncomfortable. I've only got one PUL backed pad myself so far, and I find that it doesn't bother me that much, but I haven't done much in terms of activity while wearing it, so I can't be sure about that. PUL is hard to find. You can't find it in Australian fabric stores, no matter how hard you search. It's not in Lincraft or Spotlight or any of the big chain fabric stores, and I haven't seen it in any independent stores either. And I'm a bit of a fabric shopping guru. I love to go fabric shopping, so I've been to as many fabric stores as I could possibly have been to, and I've never found PUL in store. This stuff has to be bought online. Now obviously that can be a bit problematic for the younger category of my viewers, and it's problematic for me because we don't have credit cards that we can use to purchase online. You're just going to have to suck it up and ask a parent or older relative to order some PUL for you if you want some. The best place that I think to get it is Snaps Australia. They have very affordable PUL, and I found it to be excellent quality. So I'm going to link them either on screen or down below, and you can go check them out if you want some PUL. That's where I got this stuff from, and it is great. And it comes down to like $7 a metre, which is cheaper than some of the cotton that I get. So that is a really amazing price. I would highly recommend them if you want to get some PUL. However, for beginners, fleece is probably the best backing fabric to start with. You can also back in just about any fabric that you like, and then have a hidden layer of PUL behind that backing layer between the core and the back, and that will just stop any leaks from going through if you have a non-waterproof fabric like, say, flannel on the back. Yeah, just have any fabric on the back, and by any I really mean you could do just about anything out there. As long as you don't go for something with a really high pile, like say a cuddle fleece, which is a sort of dressing gown material, then you should be absolutely fine. And even then, some people have used that and it's worked. So, backing fabrics, I'd recommend fleece to start with, but the world is your oyster when it comes to backing fabrics, as long as you have a waterproofing layer inside. Alright, now it's down to actually cutting out the pattern. Now the patterns that I make don't have an included seam allowance. If you've made your own patterns, you may or may not have included a seam allowance. Sorry, I'll just zoom out for you. There we go. You may or may not have included a seam allowance, but if you followed my method, it does not have an included seam allowance. And that is very, very important to remember when you're cutting out your pattern. So, what you need to do is you get your pattern, and with the piece of fabric you've got to make sure that you've got a little bit of space around the outside, all the way around. Just about a 1/4 inch will do, it doesn't have to be too much. And what I do is I always cut the top out first and the back out second. So I've just laid my pattern down on the paper, on the fabric. Make sure that it's lined up in a good spot. So if I really wanted to get that Cyberman in there, I'll just make sure that I've covered his face. I've still got space all around the outside, and I'm going to trace around this pattern with this marker. This is one of those erasable ballpoint pens, but I find that they're great for sewing, because what you can do is to get the lines to disappear, you just iron over them with the iron and the heat will get rid of the ink. So I think that these are absolutely amazing when it comes to tracing out patterns. So I'm just going to trace the outline of this. Okay, you may not be able to see it very well, but I have traced the outline of my pattern onto here now. And this is where it really matters whether you've got an included seam allowance or not. If your pattern does have an included seam allowance, then you cut this out straight on the lines, no worries. But if your pattern doesn't, then you have to cut it outside the lines, leaving space outside for your seam allowance. And then you'll sew along the lines that you've drawn. And this is very, very important to remember, because if you don't have an included seam allowance and you cut it out on the lines, you're going to end up with a smaller pad than you wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, leaving space all around the outside. And here we go, that's the top of my pad cut out. You can see I've got the design on that side, and the lines that I'm going to sew along are on the other side. Make sure that you trace onto the wrong side of the fabric. That's the side without the design, the side that you want to be inside the pad. So there's that cut out. And now what I prefer to do, rather than cut out the back of the, rather than cut out my backing fabric from the pattern, I get my fleece, lay this on top of it, and then I trace along the outsides of this with a Sharpie. And I do that because when I'm cutting out that extra seam allowance, sometimes I do it a bit unevenly, and I want to make sure that the front and the back piece match as perfectly as possible. I should just mention at this point, you can use just about any marker that you've got lying around, as long as it draws on the fabric that you're using. So you can use a pencil on cotton and flannel. You will need some sort of marker or chalk pen to be able to see on the fleece. You don't need a specialist fabric marking pen. I use Sharpies and erasable pens as my main markers. Use whatever you've got. So I'll just trace around all of this. And there we go, I've got the outline of my pad on the fleece. And now, because that is the outline including the seam allowance, I can cut that out on the lines. There we go. And now I've got the back of my pad, which should, when I flip it around this way, match this side just about perfectly. There we go. And then you just have to cut the core out and you'll have all that you need to be able to sew together the pad.